This video outlines the key points from Chapter 7 of Kenneth Samples Without a Doubt. This chapter is addressing the historical reliability of the Gospels. If we are making a case that Christianity is the one true religion, this is where we need to begin our argument, arguing that the Gospels are reliable. A quote from his book says, "The Christian faith depends on the historical nature and accuracy of the unique claims, character, and credentials of Jesus Christ." The claims, of course, of Jesus Christ, one of the best ones that we're talking about here for the Christian faith being dependent upon would be John 14:6, where he says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." And so that's a very exclusive claim, and from what we get there, if you look in the rest of that chapter, you see again and again, if you know me, you know the Father. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. If you love me, you love the Father. Again and again, he's equating himself to being equal with the Father in terms of divinity. And so ultimately then he's saying, "I am God." That was Jesus' claim. And other passages then, John 3:16, for instance, you either believe and accept him, you have eternal life, or you don't, you have damnation. His character and credentials obviously would back up this claim. Namely, his greatest credential would be his resurrection from the grave. Publicly dead, buried, and then empty tomb left. And so all that would verify his claims to be God and Savior of the world. And so to back this up, we get this information largely from the Gospels. So if the Gospels aren't reliable, the Christian faith is not reliable. And so to support the historical reliability of the Gospels, Kenneth Samples gives 6 arguments. One point he gives is that the New Testament documents are the best attested documents of antiquity in terms of total number of manuscripts. All right, so what are we talking about here? We're focusing New Testament. We have 5,000 individual Greek manuscripts. So the New Testament originally written in Greek. And these are handwritten before the time of the printing press and copying. And so this is something we maybe don't always keep track of in the modern world, because for us, we have print-on-demand companies now. You just buy it on Amazon. The company prints the book right then, ships it. For us to mass produce something is so easy. We have millions and millions of copies of a lot of books, right? If not just thousands for the not as popular books. So this is quite a bit of work that had to take place. And what we also don't realize is that the type of material they were written on doesn't really stand up to the test of time. It deteriorates. It maybe even gets destroyed, burned, lost. We get coffee rings on our books. Think about what could happen to a document that was written by hand, a scroll, a parchment that is 2,000 years ago was first made. And so, but surviving for us in the New Testament is 5,000 of these handwritten Greek manuscripts. Now, when I want to clarify on this, these thousands of manuscripts are not the entire New Testament, are not even the entire Gospels. In some of these instances, there are only a verse or two that have come down to us, but it still counts as a manuscript. When we move into other languages like Latin, we have 8,000 copies. If you move into count even other languages, you can get up over 20,000 copies. And even if we don't have any of these copies of just the Bible, or the New Testament books, what we also then have are thousands of manuscripts from commentaries and sermons that can be used to piece together the entire New Testament. And all of those sermons and commentaries are from early church fathers in the 2nd to 5th centuries. So even if we lost all of the manuscripts of the Bible, we could still piece together what the Bible is, verse by verse, just by how that the Bible has been quoted by the early church fathers. Having all these manuscripts has created what's known as textual criticism. Textual criticism is taking all these copies and comparing them. Because they were handwritten, maybe there were mistakes made during the copying process, right? And during this copying them, you have to compare them all to make sure that those mistakes didn't take place. And if you see that like 90% of them say one thing, 10% say something else, chances are the 10% were in error at some point, right? And so we would go with the final copy actually being what the 90% said. And again, maybe I didn't clarify on this. We don't have any of the original copies of any of these ancient manuscripts, so we're only piecing together what the authors likely wrote based on the copies that have survived to us. That's textual criticism. Here's examples then of the number of copies that we have of some other ancient works. For instance, Caesar's Gallic War. We got 9 to 10 copies. All right, you see that the earliest copy comes to us AD 900, and they were written about 50 years before Christ first came. And so the first copy we have almost 900 years after it was first written. New Testament, on the other hand, written between 40 AD to 100 AD, we have the earliest, and again, we have copies that says date back to 130 AD, but complete copy 350 AD. So the time span's a lot less, but then the number of copies is way more, which is very good, because if we only have a couple copies to compare and they're all drastically different, how can we verify what the original likely said? But if we have 5,000, as we do with the New Testament, and they're all almost identical, we can have a good confidence to know that they accurately portrayed what the original wrote. Building on that date, that dating information is the second point, that the interval of time between the date of the original authorship and the date of the earliest New Testament manuscript copies is extremely short. All right, now just to give you an idea, here's a more expansive listing of different writings, and you can see when the author lived, when the dates of the events happened, the date of the writing, and then the earliest extant manuscript. And you can notice that the amount of time that has passed for most of these, from the date of the writing to when we first have a copy, sometimes ends up being over 1,000 years, and actually that's more likely the case. And so when we get to the Bible, you see, wow, very low numbers, 100 years, 200 years or less, compared to thousands of years. And this is very important, because if thousands of years have taken place before we have the first copy, we do not we still trust these copies, but we don't know for sure what changes might have taken place in that 1,000-year period in which we do not have any surviving copies. But when we get to the New Testament, a very short period of time between when they were first written and the first copy. And then we got copies from there all the way down 1,000 years after, and the ones that are only 100 to 200 years after the first copy say the exact same thing as the ones thousands of years later. So we know that there was a good process of copying throughout them, throughout the lifetime of this manuscript. And so the idea here, the argument being presented, is if we can trust these others, which historians do, we should then be able to trust that the Gospels have come down to us accurately. Based on all this information, John Wart Montgomery has the following quote, which is just all over the place. Pretty much any Christian apologist will use this quote. He says, "To be skeptical of the resultant text of the New Testament books is to allow all of classical antiquity to slip into obscurity, for no documents of the ancient period are as well attested in bibliography as the New Testament." Amazing quote there. Basically just saying, if you can't trust that, now again, this is focusing on the bibliography, that the text has come to us accurately. Just because the text has come to us accurately doesn't automatically mean everything in it is true. For instance, I'm sure we can trust that the very first issue that contained the character Superman has somehow been preserved and passed down accurately to us, even though we only have 50 remaining copies or so of the original issue. But we can trust it's come to us accurately, I think. If we compare those 50, they're identical, right? But that doesn't mean we believe there was a Superman. So more information is needed, all right? And so in this case, Samples then moves to go outside of the Bible by saying that the historic statements made about Jesus by ancient non-Christian authors for the most part matches well with the gospel record. And he lists a bullet point of ways in which these non-Christian authors, who were contemporaries writing about the same time as the gospel writers, and these are what he lists then for us, that They say Jesus was a provocative teacher, that he was wise and virtuous from the region of Judea, that he supposedly performed miracles, made prophetic claims, that the Jewish leaders condemned him for acts of sorcery and apostasy, that he was crucified by Pontius Pilate at the time of the Jewish Passover and during the reign of the Emperor Tiberius, that his followers reported he had been risen from the dead, that the Christian faith spread to Rome where the Christians were persecuted and tried for crimes, that first century Christians worshiped Jesus Christ as God and celebrated the Eucharist in their services. And even though these Romans ridiculed the Christians as being morally weak, they were oftentimes known for their courage and virtue. All right, so all these points about Jesus that we can find in the in the New Testament can also be found outside the Bible by other historians. Now, who are these people? You would need to turn to page 95 of Kenneth Sample's book, Without a Doubt, and you will find a list of 10 of these, and he lists the dates of when they lived and in some cases when they wrote. And then what you'll see, he gives a description of who they are and what they wrote, like the name of their book. And so what you should do is take some time, look up what they actually said. These are people like Tacitus, a Roman historian, Josephus, Jewish historian, Pliny the Younger, a Roman governor, the Jewish Talmud, this is a really good one to look at, Lucian, a Greek satirist, Phlegon, a historian, Mara bar Serapion, whatever, how you pronounce his name. All these guys wrote about Jesus. Look online. A simple search like even Jesus quotes from outside the Bible, contemporary quotes about Jesus, things like that, should pull up a lot of these quotes. In my book, a little plug for it, Contradict, They Can't All Be True. I have a section where I address some of these quotes. I have them cited in here, but I think this would be a good exercise for you to find out what these people actually wrote and said, because Kenneth Samples just says a summary of what their writings would say about Jesus, but doesn't actually quote from them. And since we live in this great technological age where we can find most of this stuff within a few searches, I think we should make use of that technology. A fourth point, this is moving to the text themselves and what the writers say. They claim to be eyewitnesses of Jesus' life themselves, or they were closely associated with the eyewitnesses. And so we get this from within their own text, their own writings. Those are some verses you should look up. I would recommend that you know these. Anytime you get into a conversation with someone, you try to say they're written by eyewitnesses or that they claim to be eyewitness testimony, it'd be good to be able to go to primary source material to verify and show that. The gospel writers intended to convey factual and historical information, and the writings of their historical content have been confirmed to a significant degree. All right, so they weren't writing like it was fiction; they were writing as if it was fact. They give details that are very clear and very specific that you would not write if you were just writing just writing nonfiction. I mean, if you were writing fiction. So an example of their details, you go to John chapter 5, verses 1 to 4. It's a story about how Jesus healed a paralytic man at a well. And there are very specific details about the name of the gate, the name of the well, what side of the city it's in, that there was a five covered colonnade there, or a 5-column colonnade. And if you go online, you can search. I pulled up one picture, but you can find others where we can find this exact location based on the details written by John. And you can even see the remaining 5 columns of this covering that was at the well. Very, very cool stuff there. The last point that Samples gives is that the apostles' testimony becomes more credible when it is considered that they had nothing to gain from it and everything to lose. That their adversaries could have exposed their message as a lie, but they couldn't. We can trust their message because they had no motive or no motive to lie or deceive. And if they did lie and deceive, they violated everything Jesus taught about honesty and truth. And to be honest, when we do look at their lives, what did they gain from it? They got nothing besides being thrown in jail, stoned to death, beat, and persecuted, which means that their testimony we can look at and say is very reliable. Now, obviously, this is a good overview, and we will need to go into more detail to continue to flesh out why we can trust the Gospels to be historically reliable.